Welcome to Get Naked with Dr. Kate. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Balestrieri, a Beverly Hills-based psychologist, certified sex therapist, and the founder of Modern Intimacy. Thanks for joining me here, where I talk about sex, relationships, mental health, and dive into your questions with practical answers and real solutions. Each week, I share insights aimed at helping you build an authentic and healthy relationship with yourself, with others, and with your sexuality. It's time to get naked, emotionally, mentally, and on your own time, physically. A growing trend recently is the practice of breathwork, and although it's an up-and-coming trend, it's been around for a long, long time, and this practice has both sacred roots, but also a lot of practical application. I've invited to speak with me today about breathwork Dr. Kat Meyer, who is a licensed therapist. She is a psychedelic-assisted therapist, the host of Sex Love Psychedelics podcast, and a practice facilitator for the breathwork app called Othership. Dr. Kat, thanks so much for being here with me today. I can't wait to dive into this with you.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure to see you again and to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, for listeners, Dr. Kat and I used to be in a consultation group together years and years ago. And It's so amazing to see how we've both grown as clinicians and practitioners since that long time ago.
Yeah, wow, that was years ago. It's exciting. It's exciting to see the growth.
It is. How did you first get into breath work?
You know, I was 22 when I took my first Tantra course. So this was, for anybody who's familiar with Tantra, this is particularly the white Tantra tradition. And so it was a lot of breath work. It was a lot of chanting. It was a lot of movement of the body to invoke trance states and even grounded states of being. And I realized that, and then from there, I was also studying yoga, so the traditional practices of yoga, and I've been teaching that for 15 years. And so it was realizing how breath is a human experience that's both voluntary and involuntary, and how that can manipulate our internal state of being. And so for me, I felt a lot of emotions and a lot of anxiety and the breath work helped to settle that down or regulate the nervous system. And it's like, oh, I can feel calm in my body. I can do that. I can bring myself there.
I love that. I didn't realize that you taught yoga too. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's my company, Sex Love Yoga. It's a powerful medium through which we can, really evolve our sex and our relationships by bringing us back into the body and back into sacredness.
It is. I remember when I did my teacher training, my yoga teacher training years and years ago. I don't teach anymore, but I remember just being so in awe of the way the body would respond to breath work and the way that, and I love the language that you use, it's both a voluntary and involuntary process, because when we bring consciousness to the breath, it's really transformative, physiologically, emotionally, cognitively, and relationally. And so I wonder, when you started to make the connections with the breath and movement, what were some of the initial ahas that you had in terms of how you could benefit from breath work yourself, or how clients might apply it in their lives?
Yeah. So from my background, I come from some sexual trauma. And so there was an innate fear in my body that I wasn't as connected to on a regular day basis. It was there, and I wasn't aware of how much I was clenching or how much cues in my environment would cause me to retract. And so after my first yoga practice was the first time that I felt really calm and safe in my body. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then moving forward and studying more around, the concepts of movement in the body and opening the body and breathing through the body, it began to create more and more of a foundation of that safety. I could be with people and feel connection with another person a lot more easily than I did before. Now, of course, that's also in conjunction with a lot of trauma work, moving forward. But I think there's something so powerful in learning to be able to self-regulate, in learning to be able to inhabit your body, because that facilitates a sense of self-leadership. You know, it facilitates this, I've got me because I can learn what I need and I can take care of myself and I can discover what it is that would help me to feel most optimal or cared for, and I can communicate from that space. It's really hard for us to communicate what we need when we're dysregulated. So when you put this into a relationship, you know, our partners aren't supposed to be the primary caretaker of us. We are.
Right.
And so we take on that responsibility for ourselves, and they can be the secondary caregiver. So breath work here, imagine starting your day every day with your partner doing a breath work practice. Both of you ground. Both of you start from a calm, present state of being, and then you can move forward in your day being able to hold the different perceptions of the other person as well as your own, as well as be able to, again, take care of yourself. And then if you even do a breathwork practice before you have a hard conversation, it allows you both to come into more of a regulated nervous system state, which is also very calm and curious and compassionate. And we can hear out the side of the other person. We're a lot more open to negotiation. We're a lot more open to seeing that there's not a threat in what they're sharing.
So important what you're saying, and I think it's one of the things that is fundamentally hard about relationships today because we are so busy.
Yeah.
Folks are stressed out, people are trying to make ends meet, and they end up not taking the time because they don't have time, right, to sit down and really be internally curious. And that creates this sort of self-protection that leads them through everything in the day, including their relationship, and can make partners who are really collaborative in many ways and love each other and care about each other, really at odds with one another. And this idea of doing a breathwork practice together and grounding and really intentionally cultivating presence, it's paradoxical because most folks would say, I don't have time for that. We don't have time for that. But when you start making the time for that, even if it's just a minute or two, it's really transformative how that intentional interoception, so the practice of perceiving what's internal, can really shift the way that you connect and feel safe in yourself. You can trust yourself and trust each other more robustly.
Yeah. I was sharing with you before the call that I stepped outside and did my own practice before I came in here. I was feeling ungrounded. I was feeling, oh my God, all these people have things that they need me to respond to. And then I was like, wait, let's just take a moment and breathe and then be able to come onto this call fully present. And that's what I love about the Othership app and the classes that I've designed for them. I've designed about 5 different intimacy classes or practices, and they're all designed for partners to be able to come together. And some of them are 5 minutes long, some of them are 10, some of them are 20. And I love the variety of that because exactly like you said, we can look at something and be like, oh my God, I don't have the time for that. But maybe we can carve out 5 minutes and that's accessible. Thinking about these bite-sized pieces here. And just as much as breath, as we were talking about how breath can change our internal state. It can ground us, but it can also activate us. So when we apply this to sex or arousal, we can use different breath techniques, more of like a quicker pace in the breath or a movement with the breath and circulating. I love talking about the concept of spiraling in the body, and I'm doing it right now, so I'm talking to you. And sounds, these are elements that we can all use along with touch to be able to arouse the body and activate it.
So for people who have never done breathwork before, is it better to start with a partner or better to start on their own? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't know that there's either or that it is better than. It's more about what is it that you're seeking to experience. So these practices in here, I think couples, if they've never spent time gazing into each other's eyes, then they may feel flutters of discomfort. They may start giggling. They may have a difficult time holding the eye contact. And to me, that is information. And so if we get curious about, okay, what's going on here? Why am I having trouble? Why am I squirming? Then we can look at that and say, oh, like I've never had a partner be so present to me. I've never had somebody see me and hold me in this space, or I've never sat here for so long, you know, being particularly focused with my breath. So I just turn that into information. And then, but there is something powerful in doing it for yourself, because you are in your own energy without the energy of the other person, without the eyes or the potential, you know, quote unquote judgment. Like we're like, oh my God, are they judging me? Do I look weird? You know? So that can be helpful too, to create a foundation. But I see both of them. You can start with either one of them. It just is, information.
So let's start, before we get to all the really exciting conversations about breath work and sexuality, let's assume somebody's trying breath work for different reasons initially.
Yeah.
What are some of the things they might expect to experience in their bodies, in their mind? Like, what is it like?
That's a great question. And I think the biggest change is depending on what type of breath work there is. There's a myriad of different styles, and everybody's got their own name to do their style of breath work. So you can change breath by pace, by depth in the body. You can change it by adding tones or adding touch. You can change it by length. So there's breathwork journeys that are much longer, and then there's breathwork that can be, a couple of minutes, just used to make a state change. So if you're doing something that's more of a rapid breath or more of a shallow breath, something like in yoga we call it Kapalabhati, or breath of fire. And that will bring more of an activated feeling in the body, more an elevation of energy, and kind of like a cup of coffee where you're just alert and you're awake. And it can also leave you feeling lightheaded. So all of these practices we do in increments, or we have you lying down to prevent, to be able to support you in the change of the oxygen in the body and the carbon dioxide in the body that can cause, feelings of tingliness or lightheadedness. In some of the breathwork journeys that I do that are longer, that are about 15, 20 minutes, some clients will report having, it's so interesting, I'm talking in my therapy tone. Some people will have what's called tetany. And so that's where the arms curl, the fingertips curl. We call these lobster claws. And it's that change, it's that shift in the blood between the oxygen and the carbon dioxide. And it does subside after you start returning to a regular breathing pattern. But for many people, they're like, oh my God, am I going to get stuck this way? And the reality of it is no, you'll be able to return once everything comes back into homeostasis. But I've also had personally and students have experience of, feeling like a DMT experience where they're shot off into another dimension, or they experience an internal mirror of self where they're able to have dialogues with the parts of themselves, or they have memories arise, or they have emotions arise. So ultimately there's a lot that can happen, and all of that is welcome.
Amazing. What are some of the things that people can expect to feel after they've completed some breath work and they've returned to a baseline in their bodies? How does it integrate?
Yeah, so again, if they're doing more of a soothing, calming, down-regulating practice, they'll feel more grounded, connected to their body. They may feel more clear-minded. They may have more of a resource to be compassionate and patient with somebody else or with themselves. If they are doing one that's designed to be activating or more upregulating, they'll feel energized. They might feel a pep in their step. They might feel turned on. They might feel more motivated to take action or move forward with their day. They might even feel, and if they're doing this together as a couple, they may feel a deeper sense of connection between themselves and the other person. One of the classes that I have is designed to weave the energy between themselves and the other person. And energy, when I'm talking about that, is more of a subtle texture of this vibration that exists outside of your body.
So does that include partners doing eye gazing work, or is that a different kind of setup somatically?
Yeah. So for that one, I instruct people to be cross-legged, sitting across from each other. And they start out with the eye gaze, and they move into a calibrating breath, which is just slowing the breath down and synchronizing it together. And then I have them bring their hands together, and they move in sync with the breath, the hands in a circular movement. And so their whole body is falling into a rhythm together that's moving in and out. And then I instruct them, and so they'll feel the connection. They'll feel being in sync with one another. And then I guide them to start taking opposite breaths. And that causes more of a weaving effect of that energy. And when you and your partner can entrain your rhythms together, along with the rhythms of the music that's provided and my voice, then there's more of a opportunity of depth of connection, but also trance states that we can experience.
So let's talk a little bit about those trance states. A lot of folks hear that language, they get excited, curious, they want to learn more, but it's a little scary. Some people feel like, whoa, that's way out of anything that feels safe for me. But what exactly is a trance state as you understand it?
Yeah, a trance is a coming into a deep presence, and where everything around you just falls away. So if you've ever stared at something for a really long time, you may notice the outside peripheral going just darker, and there's a glow around whatever it is that you're focusing on. And so a trance can be that, a falling away of outside noise or environment to be deeply present with what's in front of you, or your own body. So you can have your eyes closed and be deeply dropped into that state.
Now, you often will help folks with integration and psychedelic assisted therapy. How does breath work play a role in that? I'm finishing my training now as a psychedelic assisted therapist, but you've been practicing for so long. I would love to hear your take on how it all weaves together.
Yeah. So again, the breath work is a resource for somebody to be able to learn how to have control of their own internal state. So as an integration tool, it's really powerful because in the psychedelic experience, oftentimes their nervous system could be calm. And so now it's, how can I learn to be this calm, compassionate patient with myself in the everyday life? And you have the tool of breath to be able to invoke that for yourself wherever you're at. Within the practice, and the more consistently you do that, the more that you are conditioning your nervous system to respond differently to stress. So if you have a daily practice or a multiple times a week practice, you can help to tone that vagus nerve or the parasympathetic system. In session, there's a lot that you can do with breath work. So sometimes I'll have clients at the beginning use the breath work to help to activate them and activate the psychedelic that they're using. In my office, I use ketamine-assisted therapy. And you can also use breath to be able to move energy or to be able to smooth it out. So in my personal experience with ayahuasca years ago, I discovered that I could use my own energy was coursing through me, and my whole spine was just jolting, and it was really, really intense. And then I realized if I slowed my breath down and I started caressing my body with the palm of my hand, just smoothing everything out, I could find that soft landing again while still feeling the power of the energy coursing through me. That didn't dissipate, but I could hold it so much more effectively. And so for us to realize that we can control the state of being in that sense as well, can really create a sense of empowerment for our clients and for ourselves.
Yeah, it does create this really an empowered sense of bodily trust. And that's believing and knowing that we have the ability to move through intense emotions is really the cornerstone of healing from anything.
Yeah.
And when we have that capability, and this is such a powerful tool for it, it's just a really different way of moving through life, because of course, there are lots of real life obstacles to living in a space of calm or peace. But I do think that when we have that knowing inside that we can channel our own experience and we're at more of the driver's seat than before, that creates a lot of momentum to be able to move through difficult times with a bit more ease.
Yeah, and most of the mental health challenges that we see, it comes from either the manifestation of rigidity or chaos. And these are two extremes that we might operate as a way to manage or to protect ourselves. But the breath helps us to find that middle ground. Rigidity, it helps to melt the rigidity, and chaos, it helps to contain it. So we can find through life stressors and relationship stressors that we can come back into that space. We can take care of ourselves.
Connecting breathwork to sex, you mentioned Tantra earlier, and I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit more on what that really means and what it looks like in practice for folks who want to bring it into their solo sex practice or into partnered sex.
Yeah, so Tantra is a big umbrella term for a yogic way, philosophy, and way of life. And it really is, I think so often we get fixated on Neo-Tantra, which is just around the sacredness of sex. And ultimately, it is a yogic tradition. It's a way of showing up in the world and translating what's around us and reaching enlightenment through the allowance of being human and being in the body, that we don't have to transcend to reach enlightenment. We can actually be here in the body and invite the human experience, and it's all okay. So with that, there is a lot of breath work. There is a lot of chanting. So chanting creates the sound vibration in the body that can help us to be able to, again, soothe the vagus nerve, return us into a regulated nervous system state, to ground us, but also similar with the breath, to be able to ground us, bring us into the body. But then we can also, again, shift the pace of either one of those to be able to activate the body. And so we can move energy, we call this sublimation, up the body and up from the root to the crown of the head. And that may be more of a, it's interesting. I say transcendent state as in moving upward, but we also move downward at the same time. So again, we're not necessarily leaving, we're just moving our conscious awareness and our energy into those two opposing directions. So as this relates to sex, sex, in Tantra, we also believe that everything is divine, everything is perfect, everything is spiritual and sacred. And if we were to look at ourselves and our partner as divine, as perfect, when we're making love to them, it really transforms the way that we have sex. it's a prayer. It's like sex is a prayer, or sex is worship.
Yeah, it's devotion when you've got this perfect human right in front of you that you're just completely entranced with and enthralled with. That kind of, there's an ease in recognizing the perfection that is their humanity.
And ours too. How many of us get stuck in our heads because we don't feel that our body looks right, or we're afraid of performance, or we're afraid of, that of the status of our relationship. It's also recognizing I'm worthy of love. I'm divine. I'm perfect in all of my humanness and my divinity. And breath work, again, helps us to be able to calm that, to be able to connect, and also to help us to get out of our heads.
What suggestions would you offer to people who, again, are curious but maybe don't know how to get started, or they're really into it and their partner is a little apprehensive? How should folks talk about this internally and interpersonally?
So, I mean, again, I'm going to bring up the Othership app. I think it's an excellent way to start that for yourself, because then you have somebody who's guiding you. It can be hard to start any of these practices, whether it's meditation or Tantra or a breath work by yourself. So I would recommend that first. And then if you're wanting to invite this into the bedroom and your partner's a little apprehensive, you can start something simple with inviting them, hey, can you place your chest on my chest and breathe with me for a moment? So it's not as big of a commitment, and they can feel how good this feels. It feels really pleasurable to synchronize breath. I've had the number of clients tell me how much just doing that changed the way that they related with one another in the bedroom.
It is really transformative, especially when couples are struggling to connect and they're struggling to be on the same page about things. Creating that opportunity for co-regulation and skin-to-skin contact and all of that shared energy together really does bring partners into this space of just humble appreciation for one another. And it is a great recalibration exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've had students ask me, that their partner is really dysregulated whenever they go over to their house, and they're like, does that mean that we're not going to be able to have does that mean I need to find somebody who can self-regulate? And you said the word co-regulation, and I think that's really important for us to bring in here, because I believe it's important for us to have both of those skills of self-regulation and co-regulation. Co-regulation being the practice of, let me use my nervous system and down-regulate my nervous system and how that affects the person around me. And that helps us to create a sense of a safe haven for us. Can I come? And that's why it feels so good when we go into the arms of our partner and it's calming, because there's that co-regulation going on. And so with the conscious awareness, we can use this tool more purposefully in the relationship.
Amazing. What are some of the obstacles that folks run into as they begin a breathwork practice?
I think the biggest one is consistency. They'll have a good streak for a bit, and I fully admit that happens to me sometimes. They'll have a good streak of it, and then something will interrupt, or they'll get bored, or they'll feel like they don't have time, like you were saying, and then the practice falls off. So that consistency is hard. I think some people will choose one type of breath work and do that all the time. I prefer to change mine up, because the variety keeps more of an interest. I'm a lot more likely to stay with something if I'm changing it from time to time. So I'll tune into what I want to experience or feel for that morning, or what I have to do that day, and I'll pick the practice for that.
That's really smart. I think that novelty does create more enthusiasm for a lot of folks. I think sometimes it can also be really scary for people when they've started this practice and they start, for lack of a better word, waking up into more consciousness. And I think that it can feel lonely sometimes if the folks around you are not also intentionally practicing more consciousness. And I think some folks unconsciously kind of peter away from it and become less consistent because it's really scary to think about what might happen if they leaned into the practice. I wonder if you see that too, and if so, how do you help people find a connection to the practice that doesn't feel threatening to their relationships?
Yeah, I see this across any of the modalities that bring us more internal and bring us into ourselves because, for a number of reasons. Yeah, is this going to isolate me from other people? Are people going to reject me if I start standing up for myself or, realizing what I need? But also the more that you're aware of what you need in your internal state, the more you have responsibility to do what you need to take the action that's aligned with you. And that's scary. It's like, am I going to be okay on the other side of that? And I think these tools help us to remember I will be okay. I am here for myself. I am continuing to show up for myself. So certainly. And if the things fall away or the partner falls away because you are taking care of yourself, then that is just revealing and allowing to leave what's not supportive of your health and your highest optimal self.
Yeah, I agree. It can bring up some grief, and also it can make a lot of space for different connections that feel more sustainable, more enlivening, and more available.
Yeah. I do breathwork journeys at the retreats that I do. And I'm thinking of a number of faces who they had never done anything like this, and they were new to the self-development, introspective world, and they didn't realize how much anger and grief they had in their bodies. And so when I'm saying a journey, again, this was probably 35 minutes long. And so the consistent with a breath and holding there really unlocks the body from its rigidity to allow the emotions to start flowing through. And for many of us, we're afraid. I hear this so many times. I'm afraid that I'm going to be overwhelmed by my emotions and I'm going to be lost to this pit of blackness forever, of depression, whatever it is, depression, sadness, anger, and it's going to overtake me. And in this experience, they realize they do surrender. It does in a sense, overwhelm them, but then it leaves. And it's spent rather than staying consumed.
Absolutely. I think that's been one of the more powerful revelations in my own practice with breathwork, especially when paired with psychedelics, because I've always had a pretty healthy relationship with my own anger, but I was really surprised at just how deep it is ingrained in my body. And breathwork for me has allowed me to have access to that in a safe and constructive way, and also to allow it to move through and to dissipate out. And the peace that lives in the body when we can move that anger and rage through and out is really liberating and hard to explain if you haven't experienced it.
Yeah. And same with crying. Crying is a downregulation response of the body to bring you back into a homeostasis. It's a release, just like an orgasm. So if you've ever had a crygasm or started crying in orgasm, it's just your body trying to bring you back down. And how many of us store grief and anger and in the body? It does feel relieving for that reason. I remember it was a big fear of mine to go into the depression or go into the grief that I had been holding. And I remember times in which I allowed myself to, and I'm going to explain this statement, die into the emotions, die into the experience. In Tantra, we talk a lot about the concept of rapture. Rapture is a full encompassing, a dying into whatever the pain point is, or whatever the event or thing is, to be able to be transformed or transmuted. But if we avoid or we try to protect, we'll never be able to transmute that, or to be able to transform that in our own selves. We get stuck in that space.
Yeah, stuck trying to defend from it instead of dying into it or leaning into it.
Surrendering, letting go, letting it engulf you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kat. This has been such an informative and insightful conversation. Where can folks reach you if they want to connect with you or work with you?
Yeah, they can find me at sexloveyoga.com, and they can also follow me on Instagram at sexloveyoga. I also have a podcast, Sex Love Psychedelics, where we have all these types of conversations.
Well, thank you again. And if breathwork is something that you are really curious about but don't know where to start, I highly recommend checking out the Othership app. It's really fantastic. Dr. Kat's courses are on it, as are others, and it really is a safe place to get going in this work. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Get Naked with Dr. Kate. Stay connected with me on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Kate Balestrieri. Everyone has questions, and I want to answer as many as I can. So feel free to email your questions to question@getnakedpodcast.com. If you're looking for a free 30-minute consultation with me or someone on my team, visit modernintimacy.com. And don't forget to join our newsletter, Modern Intimacy, on Substack. Let's meet back here next week. A new episode drops every Tuesday. Disclaimer, this podcast is not a substitute for therapy and does not constitute a professional relationship with Dr. Kate Balestrieri or Modern Intimacy. This podcast is strictly for education and entertainment purposes only.